There are any number of topics around housing that are important to address, but the issue I want to speak to today is about the importance of tackling homelessness, because ending homelessness and addressing encampments needs to be a top priority for all governments, including my own. Now, I'm announcing a positive contribution to these efforts today. We committed $250 million over 2 years to better address encampments in budget 2024. And I'm here to tell you that we've got deals in place now with almost every province and territory. And in the 2 cases where a provincial deal wasn't reached, we've secured deals with municipalities directly. In Ontario, that means 10 municipalities who have cost-matched our contribution in areas of high need. And in Saskatchewan, Regina and Saskatoon have partnered with us. This is progress. My community has already seen 1 life lost because of homelessness just this winter. And these federal dollars, $90 million for these 12 municipalities directly, they are going to make a difference. Now, despite the difference, I also want to be honest, our collective efforts are not at a scale they need to be at. These deals were reached before my time, but the fact that the federal government and Ontario weren't able to deliver a deal together, the fact that Ontario didn't cost match that deal, it isn't good enough. We need to put our politics aside when it comes to a crisis. And seeing our neighbors struggle on our streets, community members denied safe access to our main streets and parks, the growth of homelessness and encampments in communities big and small across our country, it is a crisis. At the federal level, we have made significant progress, and we have also met with our fair share of failure. First, what does that progress look like? Well, we've increased federal funding to address homelessness by about 400% over the last decade, with a particular increase since the pandemic. That work includes over $500 million annually through Reaching Home. Now, that's our national strategy that includes funding for housing supports, capital investments, client support services, prevention and shelter diversion, and more. There's an additional $80 million to address veteran homelessness specifically. Between 2019 and 2023, 88,000 people, more than that, have been placed into more stable housing. More than 150,000 people have been helped with core prevention services. My colleagues in the Liberal Housing Caucus were vocal in calling for action to replace encampments with homes, and our commitment to rapid-built housing continues. We've seen a number of rounds, a collective $4 billion delivered to rapid housing solutions, and now there's an ongoing effort at CMHC, $1 billion over the next 4 years to continue those important efforts. I'd also like to be honest about where we're at, because we have been moving as a country in the wrong direction when it comes to the moving targets of either having chronic homelessness by 2028 or ending chronic homelessness by 2030. In May, the PBO concluded that the best available evidence suggests that homelessness has increased in spite of Reaching Home, and as a result, the program is not on track to meet its targets with respect to reducing homelessness. The PBO went on to suggest that just having chronic homelessness would require an additional $3.5 billion per year. Well, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario weighed in more recently with a report of its own. They reiterated that encampments and homelessness are on the rise and called for a collective $13 billion commitment over 10 years in Ontario alone. I recognize there are other pressing political priorities. Of course there are. I just want Canadians to know that addressing homelessness is an immediate priority for me, and I will work with any municipality and province to make sure we deliver the right submission in the coming budget. Now, the second thing is, beyond immediate emergency efforts, housing is the long-term solution. And Canadians should know that our approach must be twofold if we take this human rights crisis seriously. First, there's the immediate crisis response, increasing emergency shelter supports, transitional housing, prevention services, and more. But we need community housing if we want a long-term solution. Housing first. A shelter bed just doesn't offer the stability that we all need. And this is where I want to call on Ontario specifically to do more, because we've seen Ontario increase its homelessness supports. That's a good thing. But they've reduced the amount they spend on community housing by roughly the same amount. Effectively, as we've ramped up federal spending on community and social housing, the Ontario government has seen fit to reduce its own commitments in this space. And we've seen an almost 10% decrease, even when the federal funding has been accounted for. As the AMO report highlights, Ontario is the only province where responsibility for social housing has been downloaded to municipalities. It doesn't need to be this way, and frankly, it wasn't always this way. If you track back to the 1960s, under a progressive conservative government, they delivered on creating an Ontario Housing Authority that put policies in place that saw a tenfold increase in social housing investments. The third thing I want to emphasize is we all deserve clean streets and parks. We can have clean streets and parks without denying people a basic sense of dignity. We don't need to threaten the notwithstanding clause in order to do the right thing. We shouldn't use people's real vulnerability and struggle for some shameless partisan end. It was about 2 years ago now, I think, that Poilievre, he shoots a video in front of a Vancouver encampment and he grandstands on the backs of people's real struggles to other those who needed a hand up. He has since compared Kelowna to a faraway third world country. This is a city with over 200,000 people and 200 people who are experiencing homelessness. The city's community safety director called the statement disappointing, and I can tell you, there are some other ways to describe a politician that uses vulnerable people as props. I completely understand. I feel the same way. I've got 2 young kids. I want to make sure our parks are for communities and families. That's what they're for. You got to make sure that our main streets are for people who are going to enjoy their community, and community members have access to small businesses, and small businesses succeed. We want successful main streets, and we want communities that thrive. But we live in a wealthy and successful country, and we can make sure we have access to our parks. Encampments in our parks, it's not an acceptable solution. People on our streets and our main streets living on the street is not an acceptable solution. We can deliver on the communities that we all deserve while ensuring that we're treating people with the basic equality of concern, respect, and dignity that they deserve too. I just want to say thanks. I'm used to walking on a Wednesday morning into caucus and getting answered questions, so it's new as a minister to be up here and answering questions in a slightly different way. So I appreciate everyone's time, and I look forward to the questions.
A little less chaotic for you in this method, maybe?
I kind of like the chaos, but that's okay.
It serves a purpose. So we'll start with questions in the room. 1 question, 1 follow. We do have a couple of people online. If you would like to ask a question and you're online, please use the raised hand function. We will start with Nick Murray from the Canadian Press.
Hi, Minister. Thanks for being here this morning. I just wonder if you can elaborate a little bit more as to why deals couldn't be reached with Ontario and Saskatchewan. I know you said that there was issues with regards to the provinces wanting to match the money that the federal government was putting in. Just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more on that specifically.
Yeah, so this was before my time. I did speak with the minister in Ontario, and he indicated there was always an openness to reaching a deal, and things went sideways for one reason or another. Obviously, timeliness was a consideration here. When you're looking at when winter's coming, you got to make sure that you're delivering all the supports you need in a real short period of time, and at the end of the day, we just need to get these deals done, and so had to reach directly to municipalities. It's not the first time, of course. We're struggling. The Canada Housing Infrastructure Program, Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund, it's a $6 billion fund over 10 years. It's $5 billion, though, to cut provincial deals. It's, again, focused on not just housing enabling infrastructure, but focused on making sure that provinces that are accepting that money are cutting red tape and upzoning. And here, again, other provinces are open to deals, and we're really struggling to reach a deal with Ontario. Again, there's an expression of openness. I just don't know if we're going to get there. And where we can't get there, where provinces aren't willing to deal, there are any number of municipalities across this country who are experiencing struggles on homelessness and with housing, and they want our federal money, and they want to do the right thing, and we're going to partner with them where we can.
Just understanding it was before your time, but on the price matching or cost matching side of things, do you have figures as far as what was being asked of Ontario and what was being asked of Saskatchewan specifically?
Yeah, so you'll see it in the background. It was about for both jurisdictions. It's about $91 million that would have been cost matched, and in Ontario, I think it's just over $85 million that would have been cost matched. These aren't huge sums of money. I mean, Ontario should come to the table. The only thing I would emphasize, they are putting some dollars on the table for homelessness. I mean, the real frustration, at the end of the day, we are going to continue to see a homelessness crisis in this country if housing is not affordable. We don't have deeply affordable, especially rental housing, but if we don't have deeply affordable community housing for people, we're going to have this struggle in an ongoing way. My kids are going to be my age, and we're going to have the same struggle, same as it ever was. And we've got to make sure there's long-term bipartisan commitments to social housing in this country, or we're going to continue to do the same thing over and over again.
We'll move online for questions. Mark Ramsey from the Toronto Star.
Hello, Minister. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yeah, where are you? Why aren't you in person? Come on, Mark.
Just stuck in the cold a little bit. I'm walking, so just want to make sure you can hear me.
I can hear you.
My question, as an MP, you're a pretty big advocate for people with disabilities, and you kind of were pretty clear on the rules for an adequate Canada disability benefit. Now people are worried about the regulations not being done on time. There's an early election, but you're a member of cabinet. You get to have a say in what should be a priority for your government. Can you give us a little bit of an insight as to, are you confident that this will go out on time? What's going on there?
Yeah, good question. And I would, I guess, emphasize at the outset that what drives me is how do we help those in the greatest need. And I said this at the tail end of my remarks, but we live in such a wealthy and successful country, and we will be that much more successful if we ensure a much stronger and more stable social safety net for those in the greatest need. And so why am I here today emphasizing in the first announcement I'm making as housing minister, emphasizing the importance of addressing encampments and supporting homelessness? It's because we've got to help those in the greatest need. That's got to be the top and immediate priority. When, it's outside of my portfolio, but the Canada Disability Benefit was important to me for the very same reason. We need to strengthen our social safety net, especially for those who can't necessarily look out for themselves in the same way. And disability benefit was a really important first step. But yeah, we've talked about its inadequacies, one in terms of the accessibility of it, and two in terms of the total amount. We can have an ongoing debate about how we fix it in the long term. In the immediate term, we've got to make sure we deliver on what's in front of us and deliver on that important first step. I have great confidence that Minister Cara is seized with this. This is I know this to be her top priority with the remaining time we've got, and I'm happy to chat with her and get back to you with greater detail and a sense of timeline. But I do know that this is her singular priority in the remaining time we've got.
Thank you. And on housing, you mentioned quite a bit of what Pierre Poilievre has said about housing, but the NDP, they've talked, I guess, they've criticized your government for kind of saying you're building or investing in affordable housing, but it's not really affordable. They've also said they think corporations should be banned from buying up affordable housing because they think that makes rents go up and costs go up. Can you speak to kind of some of their criticisms and if you think that's fair or something to consider moving forward for your government? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been interesting to me generally watching the NDP criticisms. They'll criticize any and every day. The Prime Minister, even the day that he announces, instead of, sort of acknowledging in a moment, recognizing public service with a bit of class, it's just like constant barrage of attacks. So it's hard sometimes, I think, for Canadians to discern between legitimate criticism and just ongoing sort of partisan attacks. I do think there's a legitimate criticism to say, we need to get more community housing built, and that's got to be an overriding priority. We should know, though, Canadians should know that the National Housing Strategy, which was delivered in 2017, got the federal government back in the game for the first time in, frankly, decades. And now it's just a question of scale. And instead of sort of sniping at one another, we should be working hand in hand, and the calling of the election at the end of May is a good example of this. Instead of calling for non-confidence to put one's own political interests first, we should frankly be working hand in hand to say, dental care, pharmacare, and social housing. How do we deliver on these commitments in a serious way through the remainder of this year and get as much done as we possibly can? And on the community housing front, I think we've come a long way, and now we just need to double down on the scale. But, there are any number of projects across this country, and we can get Mark, I can get you a longer list. I've got the homelessness initiative in front of me right now, but there's a long list of investments we've made on the affordable housing fund side, and it's the apartment construction loan program is one piece of it on the largely delivering for the market to deliver affordability on that front. But the Affordable Housing Fund is helping nonprofits and municipalities deliver deeply affordable housing in a serious way all across this country, and there's been great successes through that. And that fund is ongoing and continues to be available. The other thing I would say, just in terms of opportunities to work together, I just think it's incredibly important that we push back against this idea that social housing and community housing is somehow devolving our country into socialism. I mean, I've seen this attack from Poilievre a number of different times now. And look, we live in a social democracy. Like we depend upon social programs in this country, and that doesn't mean that there's the same equality of outcome for absolutely everyone in all cases. It does mean, I sincerely hope that we all believe in making sure that everyone deserves that same basic equality of concern, dignity, and respect. And that's what this is about. To your last point, just on the financialization of housing. I have been clear, even in my short time, that there are three priorities that I've got. One is making sure we remove all barriers to build, and the market's got to deliver for the market. Two, we got to understand that the market's not going to deliver the affordability that we need, and so we have to reinvest in a serious way in community and social housing. We've made a good dent, but there's a lot more for us to do. And the third, and I think this is under discussed, frankly, but we've got to treat housing as a home first and an investor second. And there are any number of different ways we can tackle that question. So first, you look at the enforcement fund for municipalities and provinces that are addressing short-term rentals, especially in BC. There's some successes on that front, but we've got to lean into those efforts. You look at what other countries do. You've got New Zealand. What do? They say if you are an investor in the residential resale space, there's going to be a stronger stress test and a more significant down payment. That there's not going to be a quality of competition between investors in the residential resale space and people who are buying a home to have as, to live in with their families. And so we do need to prioritize new investment coming in to build, but we should be very worried, and we should be putting rules in place that prioritize people who are calling that home a place to live, a place to call home, and we're not allowing investor dollars to compete in the residential resale space to displace affordability. There are other municipalities, in Montreal, for example, has got a bylaw for a right of first refusal around affordable housing. That's something that provinces and other municipalities should be looking at. The UK treats mortgage interest different on investment properties than we do. We could look at, this is a longer term conversation. I don't have the time in the 2 months I got, but reducing capital gains for builds, but actually increasing capital gains for investors that are competing in the residential resale space. I think we just got to put all ideas on the table, so we emphasize that we're going to treat housing as a home first and investment second, because what is a house? It's first and foremost, it's a home.
Given this few numbers of people that have been around, we're going to come back to the room for one more question each. Nick Murray from the Canadian Press.
Just on the issue of affordability and kind of tailoring on what you just said, just as far as policy, I'm just wondering why not further incentivize builders to sell to potential first-time home buyers through the mechanism of the FHSA, because for builders, they're going to sell to whoever they want, right? Whether it be people who are making an investment for the rental market or first-time home buyers. But so obviously they're going to get their money one way or the other. But why not further incentivize builders to sell to first-time home buyers through different mechanisms?
I suppose, I'm happy to look into that to a greater degree in terms of what that could and should look like. My initial instinct, though, is to say my focus is more on treating the distinction is more squarely between housing as a home versus housing as an investment. And so if it's a first-time home buyer, of course, we want to help young Canadians enter into the market as best we can. If we are looking at a divorced couple and someone who's looking for a home, well, they should be supported as well, right? Like they've got to have an opportunity to find a place that's affordable to call home. And so I just think the distinction that I look at is less between the demand, individuals on the demand side who are looking at it as a place to call home. That is one category, and I don't want to necessarily entirely distinguish between everyone there when I'm thinking about it from just a values perspective. And the distinction I draw is between that category, people who are truly buying a house to call home and raise a family and to live in, versus people who are competing in the residential resale space with investment dollars. And there's two ways of thinking about it. One is just there's an unfairness to folks who are trying to find an affordable place to live when you see just more demand coming into the space, when really we've got to make sure that we add as much supply as possible, and that's really my overriding focus. But it is concerning when you see, investment dollars that are adding to demand without adding to supply. The second piece is just productivity, and there are a couple ways of thinking about productivity in the housing space. One is, young people, frankly, those first-time home buyers you're talking about, they're if they can't afford to live here, they're going to leave here, and that is a long-term productivity challenge for this country. The other way to think about productivity is if investment dollars are being attracted to the residential resale space through passive investments, that's not a very productive use of capital for our economy, whereas encouraging those dollars to build and add supply is a much more productive use. And so when we think about it through a policy lens, it's just got to be, how are we distinguishing less between individuals who are looking at it as a place to live and more as between, how are we distinguishing policies to prioritize all people who are looking at affording a place and buying a place or renting a place, frankly, to live and call home.